In a quiet roadside diner, a police sergeant spots a man and a young girl walk in. The man calls himself her father, but something feels terribly wrong. The girl's trembling hands, her downcast eyes, her silent desperation. When the man steps away, she whispers just 5 words to the officer. "This man isn't my dad." Who is he? Why is she so afraid? And can this sergeant protect her from the danger closing in? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The fluorescent lights of the roadside diner buzzed softly overhead, casting a pale glow across the worn leather booths and chrome-trimmed counter. Sergeant Aaron Blake sat alone in his usual corner booth, his coffee growing cold as he reviewed his day's notes. The late hour meant only a handful of other customers occupied the space, a truck driver hunched over his plate of eggs, and an elderly couple sharing pie near the window. The gentle hum of the jukebox played an old country tune, mixing with the quiet clinks of silverware and murmured conversations. Aaron appreciated these peaceful moments after his shift, when he could gather his thoughts and decompress from the day's challenges. The bell above the door chimed, drawing his attention. A man and a young girl entered, bringing with them a gust of cool night air. Something about the pair immediately caught Aaron's trained eye. The man's smile seemed too bright, too rehearsed as he guided the girl toward a booth with his hand on her shoulder. "Come on, sweetie, let's get you those chocolate chip pancakes I promised." The man's voice carried across the diner, unnecessarily loud for the quiet atmosphere. The girl, who couldn't have been more than 8, moved stiffly, her shoulders hunched and her eyes downcast. Aaron maintained his casual posture but watched them carefully over the rim of his coffee cup. The man's cheerfulness felt forced, like an actor trying too hard to play a role. The girl, Lila, he heard the man call her, sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her feet barely touching the floor. "What can I get you, folks?" The waitress approached their table, notepad ready. "Chocolate chip pancakes for my little princess here," the man announced, reaching across to ruffle Lila's hair. She flinched slightly at his touch, a movement so subtle most would miss it. "And just coffee for me, Black." Aaron noticed how Lila's eyes kept darting toward the door, her small fingers fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. When the waitress asked if she wanted whipped cream on her pancakes, she remained silent, looking to the man for permission to speak. The man filled the silence with cheerful chatter, telling the waitress about their daddy-daughter road trip and how they'd been having such a wonderful time. But his stories seemed rehearsed, as if he'd practiced them in advance. "Excuse me for a minute, sweetheart," the man said, standing up. "Daddy needs to use the restroom." He walked toward the back of the diner, his shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. The moment he disappeared around the corner, Lila's demeanor changed. Her eyes darted around the diner, landing on Aaron. Something in his uniform, in his calm presence, seemed to give her courage. She slipped from her booth, her movements quick but hesitant. Aaron watched as she approached his table, her small frame trembling slightly. She glanced nervously over her shoulder toward the restroom before leaning in close to him. "This man isn't my dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the jukebox. The words carried the weight of desperate truth, sending a chill down Aaron's spine. Before he could respond, footsteps signaled the man's return. Lila quickly retreated to her booth, resuming her earlier rigid posture. The man, the stranger who claimed to be her father, caught Aaron's gaze as he returned to his seat. His smile widened, showing too many teeth, but his eyes remained cold and calculating. Aaron kept his expression neutral, years of training helping him maintain his composure despite the gravity of what he'd just learned. He took another sip of his coffee, his mind already working through possible scenarios and responses while the man settled back into his booth, still wearing that unsettling smile. The diner's peaceful atmosphere had shifted, replaced by a heavy tension that seemed to press down on everyone present. The man slid back into his booth across from Lila, his movements smooth but purposeful. His smile remained fixed in place, but something dangerous flickered behind his eyes. "Everything okay, princess?" he asked, his voice syrupy sweet. "You didn't touch your pancakes yet." Lila's shoulders tensed at the endearment. She picked up her fork with trembling fingers and cut off a tiny piece of pancake, bringing it to her mouth with mechanical precision. Aaron maintained his casual demeanor, though his mind raced through possible scenarios. He took another sip of his coffee, letting his gaze drift naturally around the diner while keeping the pair in his peripheral vision. "How are those pancakes, sweetheart?" the man pressed, leaning forward. "Daddy got them special for you, remember?" His tone carried an underlying current of control, each word carefully chosen to establish his authority over the girl. Lila seemed to shrink in her seat, her small frame becoming even tinier under his scrutiny. "They're good," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Aaron shifted in his booth, angling himself to better observe them while appearing to check his phone. He cleared his throat softly. "Those pancakes do look good," he said warmly, his voice carrying just enough to reach their table. "My daughter loves the chocolate chip ones here too." Lila's eyes darted to him, hope flickering across her face. The man's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "What's your name, sweetie?" Aaron asked, his tone gentle and conversational. "Lila," she responded, her voice stronger than before. The man's fingers twitched against the table. "That's a pretty name," Aaron said. "Are you enjoying your late-night breakfast, Lila?" Before the man could intervene, Lila's words tumbled out in a whisper. "He took me from a park 2 days ago." Her eyes locked with Aaron's, filled with silent desperation. "The one with the blue slide on Maple Street?" The man's facade cracked slightly, his jaw tightening. He shifted his position, subtly moving to block the clear path between their booth and the diner's exit. His movements were calculated, but Aaron noticed the slight tremor in his hands as he lifted his coffee cup. "Kids and their imaginations," the man said with a forced laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Always making up stories." Aaron kept his expression neutral, though his heart pounded against his ribs. He needed to act, but he had to be smart about it. One wrong move could put Lila in danger. He noticed how the man's eyes darted between him and the door, how his right hand disappeared beneath the table. Maintaining his casual demeanor, Aaron reached for his phone on the table, his fingers inches from the radio clipped to his belt. The man leaned back in his seat, his gaze fixed on Aaron's every movement. The tension in the diner had become almost unbearable, like a rubber band stretched to its breaking point. Aaron's hand moved casually to his belt, fingers brushing against his radio. With practiced ease, he pressed the call button while appearing to adjust his phone on the table. "Dispatch, 1023 at Joey's Diner on Route 7. Code 99, possible 207A involving a juvenile. Request immediate assistance, plain clothes approach." The crackling response was barely audible, masked by the gentle hum of the diner's background noise. Aaron kept his expression neutral, though relief flooded through him knowing help was on the way. "So," Aaron said warmly, turning slightly toward their booth, "you folks passing through town?" He made sure to keep his tone light and friendly, like any curious local might use. The man's fingers drummed against the table surface. "Just a quick stop," he replied, his words careful and measured. "Got a long drive ahead of us, right, Princess?" He directed the last part at Lila, who managed a tiny nod. "Where are you headed?" Aaron asked, taking another sip of his coffee. "I do a lot of traveling myself. Might be able to recommend some good routes." The man's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, just visiting family up north," he said vaguely, his eyes never leaving Aaron's face. "Say, you seem awful interested in our business. Any particular reason?" Lila's hands trembled as she gripped her fork, her knuckles white with tension. Aaron caught her eye briefly and gave her a subtle, reassuring nod. She drew in a shaky breath, her shoulders relaxing just slightly. "Just being friendly," Aaron replied easily, shrugging. "Small-town hospitality, you know how it is." He shifted in his seat, positioning himself so he had a clear view of both the main entrance and their booth. The movement seemed natural, but it effectively placed him between the man and the nearest exit. The man's demeanor shifted slightly, an edge of defensiveness creeping into his posture. "Right," he said, his tone cooler than before. "Friendly." His right hand remained hidden beneath the table, and Aaron noticed how he kept glancing toward the side exit. The waitress approached with a coffee pot, breaking the mounting tension. "Refill?" she asked cheerfully, oblivious to the undercurrent of danger. "Please," Aaron smiled, holding up his cup. The brief interruption gave him a chance to check his watch. Backup should be arriving any minute now. Lila sat perfectly still, her pancakes barely touched. Her eyes darted between Aaron and the man, drawing strength from Aaron's calm presence while monitoring her captor's increasingly agitated state. "You some kind of cop?" the man asked suddenly, his forced friendliness giving way to suspicion. Aaron maintained his relaxed posture, though every muscle in his body was ready to react. "Just a local who enjoys talking to travelers," he replied smoothly. "Get all kinds of interesting stories that way." Time seemed to slow as they sat in their respective positions, each movement deliberate and measured. The jukebox played softly in the background, a stark contrast to the silent battle of wills taking place between the booths. Aaron remained seated but alert, his casual demeanor masking his readiness to protect Lila at a moment's notice. The peaceful night shattered as red and blue lights suddenly flooded through the diner's windows, casting eerie shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Victor Kane's head snapped up, his practiced smile vanishing as he registered the police presence outside. His eyes darted between the exits, calculations running behind them. In one fluid motion, Kane launched himself from the booth, knocking over his coffee cup. The hot liquid splashed across the table as he made a desperate dash for the side door. But Aaron was faster, having anticipated this exact moment. He sprang from his seat and intercepted Kane, catching him around the waist in a tackle that sent them both crashing into a nearby table. "Get down on the ground!" Aaron commanded, struggling to maintain his hold on Kane, who fought with unexpected strength. The diner erupted into chaos. Plates clattered to the floor as patrons scrambled away from the fighting men. Chairs scraped against tile as people rushed to safety. Through the commotion, Lila's terrified scream pierced the air. "Someone help that child," a waitress called out, rushing to Lila's side and pulling her away from the violence. Kane drove his elbow back, catching Aaron in the ribs. Despite the pain, Aaron held firm, using his training to maintain control. They grappled across the floor, knocking over a napkin dispenser that scattered its contents like confetti. The diner's door burst open as backup officers flooded in, their weapons drawn. "Police! Don't move!" Even with 3 officers now helping to subdue him, Kane fought like a cornered animal. His eyes found Lila across the room, and his face twisted with rage. "You stupid little girl," he snarled. "You have no idea what you've done." Lila pressed herself against the waitress's side, trembling but unable to look away as the officers finally managed to force Kane's arms behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the now quiet diner. "You think this is over?" Kane spat as 2 officers hauled him to his feet, his eyes locked onto Lila one final time. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." "Get him out of here," Aaron ordered, straightening his uniform and moving to stand protectively between Kane and Lila. As the officers dragged Kane toward the exit, he continued to mutter threats, his voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence of the diner. "This isn't over." Aaron turned to Lila, kneeling down to her eye level. "You're safe now," he assured her softly. "I promise, you're safe." Through the large windows, they could see Kane being loaded into a waiting patrol car, his resistance continuing even as officers secured him in the back seat. Inside the diner, patrons slowly emerged from their hiding spots, whispering among themselves as they watched the scene unfold. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the interrogation room, Victor Kane sat with an air of defiance, his earlier charm replaced by cold hostility. His hands, still cuffed, rested on the metal table as he stared straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge the questions directed at him. "Let's start with something simple," the interviewing officer said. "Your real name." Kane's lips curled into a smirk. "I already told you. I'm Lila's father." Down the hall, in a warmly lit room designed to comfort children, Lila perched on the edge of a colorful beanbag chair. Dr. Rebecca Hart, the department's child psychologist, sat nearby, her gentle presence helping to ease some of Lila's tension. A soft, plush rabbit lay in Lila's lap, and her small fingers worked through its fur repeatedly. "You're doing very well, Lila," Dr. Hart said softly. "Would you like to tell me about what happened at the park?" Aaron Blake stood in the observation room between the two spaces, his attention divided between multiple monitors. On one screen, Kane maintained his arrogant facade, deflecting every question with practiced ease. "You have no right to hold me," Kane insisted, leaning back in his chair. "I was simply taking my daughter to get something to eat. Ask her yourself. She knows me." On another monitor, Lila's small voice trembled as she began to speak. "He had a puppy," she said, clutching the stuffed rabbit tighter. "A little brown one. He said it was lost and needed help finding its home." Dr. Hart nodded encouragingly, making careful notes. "What happened next, Lila?" "When I got closer to look at the puppy, he grabbed me." Lila's voice dropped to a whisper. "There wasn't really any puppy. He pushed me into his car really fast. I tried to scream, but he covered my mouth." In the interrogation room, Kane's demeanor remained unchanged as officers pressed him for details about his supposed relationship with Lila. "We live at 742 Oak Street," he claimed smoothly. "Her favorite color is pink. She loves pancakes, that's why we were at the diner." But Lila's concurrent testimony painted a very different picture. "He took me to a basement," she continued, tears welling in her eyes. "It was dark and cold. There was a little window, but it was too high to reach. I could hear cars sometimes, but nobody could hear me calling for help." Aaron's jaw tightened as he watched both interviews unfold. The stark contrast between Kane's calculated responses and Lila's raw, emotional account was striking. He gestured to a nearby officer to run Kane's fingerprints through the system, suspecting the man's true identity would reveal much more. Kane's confidence finally wavered when presented with specific details about the basement where Lila was held. His smirk faded, replaced by a tight-lipped silence. He sat back in his chair, crossing his arms, and stared at the wall. Dr. Hart emerged from her session with Lila, her expression grave as she approached Aaron. "Her description matches perfectly with the evidence from the basement found at the scene," she said quietly. "The window placement, the sound of traffic from the nearby highway, every detail aligns." Aaron nodded, watching Kane through the one-way glass. The suspect's sudden silence spoke volumes, suggesting he was protecting something, or someone, bigger than himself. The forensic analyst burst into the observation room, her face flushed with urgency. "Sergeant Blake, we got a hit," she said, thrusting a file into Aaron's hands. "Victor Kane, wanted in connection with child abductions in 3 states. Aaron's eyes scanned the document, his expression hardening. Multiple charges, multiple victims, but something didn't add up. The pattern suggested Kane worked with others, moving children across state lines like pieces on a chessboard. Back in the interrogation room, Kane's smug expression remained unchanged as Aaron laid out the evidence. "Victor Kane," Aaron said, spreading photos across the table. "Quite a resume you've built." Kane leaned forward, his cuffed hands folded neatly. "Impressive research, Sergeant, but you're only seeing the surface." "Then help me understand," Aaron pressed. "Who else is involved?" Kane's smile widened. "You really think I acted alone? Poor naive officer." Aaron studied the man before him, comparing his features to Lila's description of her initial abductor. Kane's dark hair and medium build didn't match the tall, blonde man she'd described at the park. The discrepancy nagged at him. "The man who took Lila from the park," Aaron said carefully. "That wasn't you, was it?" Kane's eyes flickered, just briefly, before his mask of confidence returned. "I told you. I'm her father." Aaron pulled out his notebook, reviewing Lila's statement. Tall man, blonde hair, blue eyes, speaking with what she described as a funny accent. "That's not you, Victor." "Children's memories can be unreliable," Kane deflected, but his posture had stiffened. The pieces started falling into place. Kane wasn't the mastermind. He was a transporter, moving children for someone else. His criminal record showed a pattern of involvement after the initial abductions, never before. "Who are you working for?" Aaron demanded. Kane's response was silent, but his eyes held a glimmer of something that looked almost like fear. Aaron recognized that look. It was the expression of someone who answered to a higher, more dangerous authority. Frustrated by Kane's continued silence, Aaron gathered his files. This interrogation was going nowhere, but he had a new lead to pursue. Lila's detailed description of her initial abductor could be the key to unraveling a larger network of criminals. As Aaron left the interrogation room, his determination had only grown stronger. He needed to speak with Lila again, to gather more details about the man who had first taken her. Her clear memory and brave testimony could be the breakthrough they needed to expose the entire operation. In the quiet room of the police station, Aaron sat across from Lila at a small table. Soft light filtered through the blinds, creating a gentle atmosphere. He placed a fresh sketch pad and a box of colorful crayons in front of her. "Lila," Aaron said softly, "I know this might be scary, but could you draw the man who took you from the park? The one before Victor?" Lila's small hands trembled as she reached for a crayon. She stared at the blank paper, her lower lip quivering. "He had cold eyes," she whispered. "Take your time," Aaron encouraged. "You're safe here." Slowly, Lila began to draw. Her strokes were careful and deliberate as she sketched the face that haunted her memories. She chose a blue crayon for the eyes, pressing hard enough to make them stand out against the pale paper. "His voice was different," she said, switching to a yellow crayon for the hair. "Not like people talk here." Aaron watched as the face took shape on the paper. Something about it seemed familiar, tugging at his memory of case files he'd reviewed. The sharp jawline, the distinctive nose, the cold blue eyes. It all pointed to someone he'd seen before. "He told Victor to watch me careful," Lila continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said..." She stopped drawing, tears welling up in her eyes. "He said if I made noise, I'd never see my mom again." Aaron felt his chest tighten as recognition hit him. The face on the paper matched photos he'd seen in countless briefings. Elliot Graves, a notorious trafficker who'd managed to stay one step ahead of law enforcement for years. "Lila, you're doing great," Aaron assured her, sliding a tissue across the table. "Can you tell me anything else about when this man gave you to Victor?" Lila wiped her eyes with the tissue. "They met in a parking lot at night. The first man, he talked to Victor like he was the boss. Victor looked scared of him." Aaron carefully took the completed sketch, comparing it mentally to the surveillance photos of Elliot Graves he'd seen in briefings. The resemblance was uncanny, from the cold blue eyes to the distinctive scar near his left ear that Lila had carefully drawn with remarkable detail. "You're very brave, Lila," Aaron said, watching as she hugged herself tightly. "Everything you've told us is going to help keep other kids safe." Lila looked up at him, her eyes still wet with tears. "He's still out there, isn't he? The scary man with the cold eyes." Aaron nodded solemnly. "Yes, but you've helped us know exactly who he is, and I promise you, you're safe now." The girl's shoulders shook as she began to cry again, the memories overwhelming her. Aaron placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering what comfort he could while his mind raced with the implications of this revelation. Elliot Graves was the mastermind and Victor Kane was just one of his subordinates. The sketch in his hands was the key to connecting all the pieces. The interrogation room felt colder than usual as Aaron sat across from Victor Kane. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on Victor's face, but they did nothing to dim his unsettling smile. 2 armed officers stood guard by the door, a new security measure after Victor's true identity came to light. "We know about Elliot Graves," Aaron said, sliding Lila's sketch across the metal table. Victor barely glanced at the drawing. He leaned back in his chair, the handcuffs clinking against the metal frame. "Do you now?" His smirk widened. "How many more children are there, Victor?" Aaron kept his voice steady, though anger simmered beneath the surface. "More than you can imagine," Victor replied, his eyes gleaming. "But you can't save them all, Officer Blake. Some games are too big for small-town cops." Aaron leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. "This isn't a game. These are children's lives. Everything's a game if you know the rules." Victor's confidence never wavered. "And trust me, you don't know half the rules yet. Give me names, locations, anything, we can work something out." Victor laughed, a hollow sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "Work something out? You really don't understand what you're dealing with, do you?" The interrogation continued for another hour, but Victor remained unmoved, His smug demeanor suggested he held cards Aaron couldn't see, and that thought churned in Aaron's stomach. Exhausted and frustrated, Aaron finally left the station. The parking lot was quiet, most officers having gone home for the night. As he approached his car, something caught his eye: a folded piece of paper tucked under his windshield wiper. Aaron's heart rate quickened as he unfolded the note. The message was typed in plain black letters: "You've gone too far, Officer Blake." He scanned the empty parking lot, knowing whoever left the note was long gone. The threat was clear. The network knew who he was, and they were watching. Anger mixed with fear as he crumpled the paper in his fist. Taking a deep breath, Aaron turned back toward the station. The stakes had just risen dramatically, and he needed to act fast to protect both Lila and himself. Aaron's footsteps crunched on the gravel driveway as he approached his modest, single-story home. The evening air hung heavy with exhaustion after his long day at the station. His porch light cast a warm glow, but something felt off. As he got closer, his trained eye caught the slight gap between his front door and the frame. His heart rate quickened as he drew his service weapon. Years of police work had taught him to trust his instincts. Moving silently, he positioned himself beside the door, listening for any movement inside. Nothing but silence greeted him. Aaron pushed the door open slowly with his left hand, keeping his weapon ready. The interior was dark except for the faint light filtering through his kitchen window. He moved methodically through each room, clearing them one by one. His living room was a mess. Couch cushions lay scattered across the floor, and his bookshelf had been emptied. In the kitchen, drawers hung open, their contents spilled across countertops. Yet his laptop sat untouched on the dining table, and his television remained mounted on the wall. When he reached his home office, Aaron's breath caught in his throat. Amid the chaos of scattered papers and upended furniture, a small USB drive sat perfectly centered on his desk. The placement was too deliberate to be random. Aaron pulled out his phone and called dispatch. "This is Sergeant Blake. I need a team at my residence. Possible break-in." He gave his address and waited for confirmation before approaching the USB drive. His hands trembled slightly as he plugged it into his computer. A video file automatically opened, and Aaron's stomach turned as Lila's face filled the screen. She sat huddled in a dark basement, her small frame shaking with fear. Text appeared across the bottom. "You're in over your head, Officer Blake." The video continued, showing different angles of Lila during her captivity. More messages flashed across the screen. "We see everything. Back off while you can. Some games are better left unplayed." Aaron's jaw clenched as he watched. These weren't random clips. They were carefully edited, clearly meant to shake him. The final frame showed Lila being handed off to Victor Kane, with Elliot Graves visible in the background staring directly at the camera. Sirens wailed in the distance as Aaron dialed another number. "This is Sergeant Blake. I need 24-hour surveillance on my residence." He paused, listening to the response. "And get me the number for Lila's foster family. We need to move her to protective custody immediately." He ended the call just as patrol cars pulled up outside, their red and blue lights painting his walls in alternating colors. Aaron stood in his ransacked office, anger replacing his initial shock. If Elliot thought intimidation would work, he had seriously miscalculated. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in Aaron's office, casting thin stripes of light across his desk. Lila sat in an oversized chair, her small hands wrapped tightly around a plush teddy bear the department had given her. Her feet barely touched the ground as she swung them nervously. "Can you tell me about your mom, Lila?" Aaron kept his voice gentle, watching her expression carefully. Lila's fingers traced patterns in the teddy bear's fur. "Her name is Claire," she whispered, then paused. "She works at the library. She reads me stories every night before bed." Aaron nodded encouragingly. "That's really helpful. Do you remember her last name?" "Anderson," Lila said after a moment. "Claire Anderson." Aaron typed quickly into his computer, scanning through recent missing persons reports. His heart jumped when a match appeared. Claire Anderson had reported her 8-year-old daughter missing just 2 days ago. The photo matched Lila perfectly. He picked up his phone, dialing the number listed in the report. After 2 rings, a woman's anxious voice answered. "Mrs. Anderson, This is Sergeant Aaron Blake from the police department." He paused, hearing her sharp intake of breath. "We've found Lila. She's safe." A sob broke through the phone. "You found her? My baby's alive?" "Yes, ma'am. She's here at the station. She's asking for you." Claire arrived barely 40 minutes later, her hair disheveled and eyes red from crying. When she burst into Aaron's office, Lila looked up, her eyes wide with recognition. "Mommy?" Her voice trembled. "Lila!" Claire rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside the chair. "Oh, baby, I've been so worried." Lila hesitated for just a moment before launching herself into her mother's arms. They clung to each other, both crying now, as Claire stroked her daughter's hair and whispered words of comfort. Aaron stepped back, giving them space for their reunion. But the peaceful moment shattered when Claire's phone rang. She pulled it from her pocket, frowning at the unknown number. "Hello?" she answered, still holding Lila close. The color drained from her face as she listened. Her hand tightened protectively around Lila's shoulders. "Who is this?" Claire's voice shook. "What do you want?" Aaron moved closer, already suspecting what was happening. Claire lowered the phone, her eyes wide with fear. "They said..." She swallowed hard. "They said they're coming for her." Aaron immediately shifted into action mode. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm moving you both to a safe house right now. Officer Thompson!" He called to a colleague in the hallway. "Get a protection detail ready." He led Claire and Lila through the station's back entrance, where an unmarked police car waited. Lila clutched her teddy bear with one hand and her mother's sleeve with the other, while Claire kept glancing nervously over her shoulder. The safe house was a modest two-bedroom home in a quiet neighborhood. Aaron conducted a thorough sweep before letting them inside, where 2 officers were already stationed. "You'll be safe here," Aaron assured them as Claire settled Lila onto a worn but comfortable couch. "We have officers watching the house around the clock." The abandoned warehouse loomed against the night sky, its crumbling walls covered in layers of graffiti. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete, and broken windows gaped like dark, empty eyes. Aaron crouched behind a rusted dumpster, signaling to his tactical team spread out around the perimeter. "Alpha team, move in from the east," he whispered into his radio. "Beta team, secure the west exit. Remember, suspects may be armed and dangerous." The team moved with practiced precision, their boots silent on the gravel. Aaron's heart pounded as he led the way to the main entrance, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The warehouse door creaked as they pushed it open, the sound echoing through the vast space. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. Aaron's beam swept across empty pallets and scattered debris. The team spread out, clearing each section methodically. "Sergeant Blake," Officer Martinez called softly. "You need to see this." In what appeared to be a makeshift office, they found filing cabinets filled with detailed ledgers. Aaron flipped through pages of financial transactions, his stomach turning as he realized each entry represented a child's life reduced to dollars and cents. "Sir, over here." Another officer gestured to a wall of monitors. The screens were dark now, but when they powered them up, they displayed footage of various locations: parks full of playing children, school playgrounds during recess, community centers bustling with activity. "They've been watching," Aaron muttered, anger rising in his chest, "planning their targets." In a corner, they discovered a box of fake IDs, each crafted with frightening attention to detail. But the warehouse felt too quiet, too empty. The dust patterns on the floor suggested recent activity, yet everything of real value had been cleared out. "They knew we were coming," Aaron said, frustration evident in his voice. The team found a locked room at the back of the warehouse. After forcing entry, they discovered a sophisticated computer setup, but the hard drives had been wiped clean. Aaron examined the equipment, noting the professional-grade surveillance technology. As the forensics team began documenting everything, Aaron noticed a piece of paper partially burned in a metal trash can. He carefully extracted it, finding a partially readable email thread. His eyes widened as he scanned the text. There was mention of a meeting location, though part of the details were destroyed. Standing amid the evidence of such calculated evil, Aaron watched his team photograph the surveillance footage still displayed on the monitors. Children laughing, playing, completely unaware they were being watched by predators. The images of those innocent faces strengthened his resolve to bring down this network, no matter what it took. The FBI field office hummed with activity as Aaron made his way through security checkpoints. Agents moved purposefully between desks, their conversations creating a constant background murmur. He clutched the evidence folder from the warehouse raid, his determination evident in his stride. Agent Maya Hart sat at her workstation, surrounded by multiple computer screens displaying complex data patterns. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her expression remained focused as Aaron approached. "Sergeant Blake," she said without looking up. "I heard about the warehouse raid. Not exactly by the book, was it?" Aaron placed the folder on her desk. "We didn't have time for bureaucracy. These kids can't wait." Maya finally turned to face him, her sharp eyes scanning his face. "Walk me through what you found." As Aaron detailed the warehouse discovery and the partially destroyed email, Maya's expression shifted from skepticism to intense interest. She picked up the charred paper fragment, examining it under a desk lamp. "This encryption pattern," she said, pointing to a string of characters. "It's sophisticated. Elliot Graves' signature work. He's using a rotating cipher that changes every 12 hours. "Can you crack it?" Aaron asked. Maya's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Graves isn't just some amateur criminal with a computer. He was a brilliant developer before." She paused, pulling up his file. "Before his daughter died due to medical malpractice. He blamed the entire healthcare system, disappeared, and resurfaced as a key player in trafficking networks." "But why target children?" Aaron leaned against her desk. "Control. Power. Revenge against a world he thinks failed him." Maya's eyes narrowed as she studied the data. "He's created an intricate web of false leads and dead ends. Every time law enforcement gets close, he's already 3 steps ahead." Aaron crossed his arms. "So what's your suggestion? Wait until he slips up?" "No," Maya replied sharply. "We create a trap, use his own methods against him, but we do it smart, not by charging into warehouses without proper backup." Aaron bristled at her tone, but before he could respond, Maya held up her hand. "Look, I get it. You want to save these kids. So do I. But Graves is watching. He's probably monitoring this building right now through our own security cameras." Her words gave Aaron pause. She was right. They needed to be strategic. "Okay," he said, pulling up a chair. "How do we outsmart him?" Maya's expression softened slightly. "First, we trace this email. The encryption is complex, but there's always a pattern. Give me 48 hours with this data. I'll find something we can use." They spent the next hour reviewing the evidence, their initial tension giving way to focused collaboration. Maya's expertise revealed layers of complexity in Graves' operation that Aaron hadn't considered. "I'll help you bring him down," Maya said finally, extending her hand. "But we do this right. No more lone wolf tactics." Aaron shook her hand, feeling for the first time since the warehouse raid that they might actually have a chance at stopping Elliot Graves. In a nearby surveillance room, multiple screens showed their meeting from different angles, while in a hidden location elsewhere, Elliot Graves watched with a knowing smirk, already planning his next move. At the police safe house, the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the conference room table. Aaron and Maya sat across from Claire and Lila, the weight of their proposed plan hanging heavy in the air. "You want to use my daughter as bait?" Claire's voice trembled with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "After everything she's been through?" Aaron leaned forward, his expression gentle but serious. "We'll have eyes on her the entire time. Multiple tactical teams, surveillance equipment. She'll never be in real danger." Maya pulled out a tablet showing Claire the detailed security measures. "We've mapped every possible scenario. There will be officers posing as a family with her, and backup units stationed at all exit points." "No." Claire shook her head firmly. "Absolutely not." "I want to help." Lila's small voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned to look at her, surprised by her determination. "I don't want him to hurt other kids like he hurt me." Claire's eyes welled with tears. "Honey, you don't have to do this." "But I want to," Lila insisted, gripping her mother's hand. "Please, Mom, I'll be brave." After hours of discussion and planning, Claire finally gave her consent. The team moved quickly to set up the operation at City Center Plaza, a bustling shopping area where families gathered on weekends. Lila walked between two undercover officers, a man and woman posing as her parents. She clutched a teddy bear that Maya had fitted with a sophisticated tracking device. The bear's glass eyes contained tiny cameras providing additional surveillance angles. In a nondescript van parked nearby, Aaron and Maya monitored multiple screens showing different views of the plaza. Aaron's jaw clenched as he watched Lila maintain her composure, though he could see the slight tremor in her hands. "She's doing great," Maya murmured, adjusting one of the camera feeds. Hours passed. Families came and went. The sun climbed higher in the sky, then began its descent. Just as Aaron was about to call off the operation, Maya grabbed his arm. "Movement at 2 o'clock, she said sharply. "Male, dark jacket, approaching from the fountain." Aaron watched as the man casually walked toward Lila. He appeared ordinary, the kind of person you'd pass on the street without a second glance. The man stopped near Lila's group and spoke quietly. "The carousel spins both ways," he said, the exact phrase they'd found in Elliot's encrypted communications. Before the man could react, tactical teams converged from all directions. He attempted to flee but was quickly subdued. In the van, Aaron and Maya exchanged looks of cautious triumph. The lieutenant's capture was a start, but they knew Elliot was still out there, watching and waiting. During initial questioning, the lieutenant revealed vague details about a safe house in the suburbs where Elliot's operatives sometimes gathered. The team immediately began analyzing this new lead, hoping it would bring them one step closer to dismantling the network. The suburban house loomed before them, its darkened windows like empty eyes staring into the night. Aaron adjusted his tactical vest while Maya double-checked her equipment. The SWAT team moved into position, their movements precise and silent. "Alpha team, take the front. Bravo, secure the perimeter," Aaron whispered into his radio. "Remember, there may be children inside. Exercise extreme caution." On his signal, the teams breached the house simultaneously. The front door splintered under controlled force as officers streamed inside, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. The house smelled of stale air and abandonment, but subtle signs, a warm coffee mug, recently disturbed dust, suggested they'd just missed their targets. "Clear!" called voices from different rooms echoing through the empty spaces. In the kitchen, Maya pointed to fresh tire tracks visible through the back window. "They knew we were coming," she said grimly. The basement door creaked as Aaron led a team downstairs. Their flashlights revealed a horror scene. 6 small cells lined the walls, each with a thin mattress and minimal provisions. Frightened eyes peered out from behind the bars. "It's okay," Aaron said softly, holstering his weapon. "We're the police. We're here to help you." The children, ranging from 6 to 12 years old, huddled in their cells. Maya worked quickly with the tactical team to pick the locks while Aaron radioed for medical support. As each cell opened, the children emerged cautiously, some crying, others too shocked to speak. Suddenly, gunfire erupted from upstairs. Aaron instinctively moved to shield the nearest child as Maya coordinated with the tactical team to secure the basement exit. "Multiple armed suspects engaged," crackled over the radio. "Second floor, west side." The firefight was intense but brief. 3 of Elliot's operatives were captured, while 2 more escaped through a window. None of them was Elliot. While the SWAT team secured the prisoners, Maya discovered a hidden panel behind a bookcase. It slid aside to reveal a small room filled with sophisticated computer equipment. Multiple monitors displayed surveillance footage of various locations: schools, parks, shopping centers. Scattered papers covered a desk, many partially burned or shredded. Maya quickly began analyzing the computers while Aaron supervised the evacuation of the children. One file, partially deleted but still accessible, contained fragments of information about upcoming operations. The data was incomplete, but it suggested Elliot had contingency plans already in motion. Outside, ambulances and additional police units arrived. Social workers began the process of identifying the rescued children and contacting their families. Aaron watched as the young victims were carefully led to waiting medical personnel, each child wrapped in a shock blanket. Maya emerged from the house, clutching a hard drive. "We got something," she said, "but most of the data is corrupted. Elliot's good. He had everything set to wipe automatically." The captured operatives were loaded into police vehicles while crime scene technicians began processing the house. Aaron and Maya stood watching the scene unfold, their victory tempered by the knowledge that Elliot himself remained free. The fluorescent lights of the police station hummed overhead as Aaron and Maya hunched over a computer screen. The recovered USB drive from the safe house had yielded an unexpected treasure trove of encrypted messages. "Look at this pattern," Maya said, pointing to a series of timestamps. "These messages align perfectly with our failed raids. Someone's been feeding them information." Aaron's jaw tightened as he read through the decrypted communications. The messages were careful, using code words and vague references, but the meaning was clear. Someone within law enforcement was working with Elliot's network. Maya pulled up the department's internal logs, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "I can cross-reference the message times with access to our case files." She created a spreadsheet mapping out who had accessed sensitive information before each compromised operation. "There," Aaron said, pointing to a recurring name. "Captain Reed accessed these files minutes before each of these messages was sent." They stared at Captain Thomas Reed's name on the screen. The senior officer had been with the department for 20 years, managing high-level operations and commanding universal respect. "We need to handle this carefully," Maya warned. "If we're wrong—" "We're not wrong," Aaron said firmly. "The evidence is right here." They found Reed in his office, reviewing paperwork with his usual methodical precision. When Aaron closed the door behind them, Reed looked up with mild curiosity that quickly turned to wariness. "Captain," Aaron began, "we need to discuss some communications we found." Reed's face remained neutral, but his hand twitched slightly. "What communications?" Maya opened her laptop, displaying the encrypted messages. "These were sent to Elliot Graves. They match perfectly with your access to our case files." "This is ridiculous," Reed scoffed, but his voice wavered. "You can't possibly think—" "We have the timestamps, Captain," Aaron interrupted. "Every leaked operation, every failed raid. You accessed the files just before Elliot's network was warned." Reed's composure cracked. His shoulders slumped and he seemed to age years in moments. "You don't understand," he whispered. "They have my daughter." The confession hung heavy in the air. Reed explained how Elliot had approached him 6 months ago with photos of his daughter at college, along with explicit threats. The bribes came later, after Reed was already compromised. "I tried to minimize the damage," Reed said, his voice breaking. "I only gave them what I had to. But they kept asking for more." Aaron called for officers to take Reed into custody. As they led the captain away in handcuffs, the weight of his betrayal settled over the station. Officers who had served under Reed for years watched in shocked silence as their commander was escorted to booking. Maya gathered the evidence while Aaron briefed the chief. The revelation of Reed's betrayal had shaken the department's foundation, raising questions about who else might be compromised. In the stark conference room of the police station, Aaron paced while Maya sat at the long table, surrounded by senior officers and PR personnel. The tension in the room was palpable as they debated their next move. "We need to force his hand," Aaron said, stopping to lean against the table. "Elliot's been operating in the shadows for too long. Going public could disrupt his entire network." Maya rubbed her temples, considering the implications. "It's risky. He could panic, hurt more children, or go completely underground." "That's exactly what we want," Aaron countered. "Underground means contained. Right now, he's free to keep expanding his operation." The PR team laid out mock-ups of press releases and prepared statements. Photos of Elliot Graves stared back at them, a middle-aged man with cold eyes and an unremarkable face that had allowed him to blend in for years. "The public needs to see this face," Aaron insisted. "Every parent, teacher, and community member should know who he is." Maya finally nodded. "Agreed. But we need to be strategic about the information we release. Too much could compromise our investigation." The press conference was arranged within hours. Television crews set up their equipment outside the station while reporters jostled for position. Aaron stood at the podium, with Maya beside him, as cameras flashed and microphones captured every word. "This man is Elliot Graves," Aaron announced, his voice firm as Elliot's photo appeared on screens behind him. "He is wanted in connection with multiple child abductions and trafficking operations across the state." Maya stepped forward to detail specific incidents, carefully omitting sensitive information while emphasizing the urgency of public assistance. "We're offering a substantial reward for information leading to his arrest. No detail is too small." Within minutes of the conference ending, the police hotline lit up. Tips poured in from across the city. Possible sightings, suspicious activities, abandoned properties that matched their profile of Elliot's safe houses. In the cyber unit, Maya monitored a sudden surge in encrypted communications. "Look at this," she called to Aaron. "His network is scrambling. The messages are getting sloppy. They're panicking." Aaron watched the activity patterns on Maya's screen. "Can you trace any of these?" "They're still encrypted, but the volume helps us identify clusters of activity. These 3 locations show the highest concentration of messages." The strategy was working, pushing Elliot's carefully constructed network into disarray. Each hour brought new tips and leads, forcing his operatives to abandon established routines and safe houses. Maya's monitoring software flagged another spike in encrypted traffic. "He's moving," she said, fingers flying across the keyboard. "These messages suggest he's evacuating at least 2 locations we didn't know about." Aaron nodded grimly. "He's running out of places to hide, but that also means he's desperate, and desperate people make mistakes." The winter wind howled through the dense forest as Aaron and Maya crouched behind snow-covered trees, their breath visible in the frigid air. The cabin, barely visible through the thick evergreens, stood like a dark sentinel in the gathering dusk. Surveillance drones hummed quietly overhead, their thermal imaging feeds displaying multiple heat signatures within the structure. 3 adults on the main floor, Maya whispered, studying her tablet. At least 5 smaller signatures in the basement, likely the children. Her fingers, despite the cold, moved swiftly across the screen as she analyzed the data that had led them here. Aaron signaled to the tactical team, their black uniforms blending with the shadows. They moved forward in practiced formation, boots crunching softly in the fresh snow. The thermal imaging showed movement inside. Their targets were awake and active. "Team Alpha, take the rear," Aaron commanded softly into his radio. "Team Bravo with me on the front. Remember, children are present. Exercise extreme caution." The breach was simultaneous, front and rear doors crashing inward as flashbangs created momentary chaos. Aaron led his team through the front, weapon raised, scanning for threats. The cabin's interior was sparse but showed signs of long-term occupation. "Police, don't move!" Multiple voices shouted as the teams converged inside. They found the first children in locked rooms off the main hallway, huddled together, eyes wide with fear. 2 of Elliot's operatives raised their weapons, but were quickly subdued by the tactical team. Elliot himself stood in the basement doorway, a gun pressed against one child's temple. His cold eyes surveyed the scene with calculated calm. "Back off," he commanded, "or this gets messy." The radio crackled to life. Lila's voice, small but determined, came through. "Aaron, when I was there, he always kept his real gun in his left pocket. The one he's holding isn't loaded. He uses it to scare people." Aaron processed this information, noting Elliot's stance. The man's left hand was indeed tucked into his pocket, likely gripping his actual weapon. "It's over, Elliot," Aaron declared, keeping his voice steady. "We know about the empty gun. Let the child go." A flicker of surprise crossed Elliot's face, just enough hesitation for Aaron's team to act. They rushed forward as Elliot reached for his left pocket, but the tactical team was faster. Within seconds, they had him pinned and handcuffed. The remaining operatives surrendered without further resistance. As officers led them away, others attended to the frightened children, speaking softly and offering comfort. Elliot remained silent as officers escorted him up the cabin's steps. He paused briefly at the doorway, meeting Aaron's gaze with an unreadable expression. Aaron stared back, determined to understand what had driven this man to commit such crimes. In his home office, Aaron sat surrounded by stacks of files and scattered notes. The lamp cast a warm glow over his desk as he pored through records, determined to understand the man behind the trafficking network. His coffee had gone cold hours ago, forgotten in his intense focus on unraveling Elliot Graves's past. The first breakthrough came in old business records. Before his crimes, Elliot had founded a successful software development company specializing in encryption technology. Photos from tech conferences showed him in crisp suits, confidently presenting to crowds. His company had won several innovation awards, and his future seemed bright. Marriage records revealed his union to Helen Graves 15 years ago. Their wedding announcement painted a picture of young love, both successful professionals with promising careers. Aaron found more articles featuring the couple at charity events and business functions, always smiling, always together. Then came Emily's birth announcement in the local paper. Elliot and Helen Graves welcomed daughter Emily Rose. The accompanying photo showed Elliot cradling his newborn, his face transformed by pure joy. More records followed: Emily's preschool enrollment, family vacation photos, normal moments of a happy life. After hours of searching, Aaron located Helen Graves. She lived in a small town 3 hours away, having changed her name but not completely disappeared. His call to her was met with initial hesitation, but something in his voice convinced her to meet. They sat in a quiet cafe the next day. Helen's hands trembled as she stirred her tea, her face bearing the weight of painful memories. Elliot was different then, she began softly. He was kind, generous. The day Emily was born, I'd never seen anyone so happy. She described their life together: weekend picnics, bedtime stories, family game nights. Elliot had worked long hours but always made time for his daughter. He would come home exhausted but still spend an hour playing with her blocks or reading her favorite book for the 100th time. Helen reached into her purse and withdrew a worn photograph. It showed Elliot in their backyard, holding Emily high in the air. Both were laughing, caught in a moment of pure happiness. This was taken 2 weeks before. Her voice trailed off as she handed the photo to Aaron. Aaron studied the image carefully. The man in the photo bore little resemblance to the hardened criminal he'd arrested. This Elliot's eyes sparkled with joy, his smile genuine and warm as he gazed up at his daughter. Aaron found himself struggling to connect these two versions of the same man, the loving father and the ruthless trafficker. "Keep it," Helen said quietly, pushing the photo toward him. "Maybe it will help you understand who he was before everything changed." Helen's hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup as she gathered the strength to tell her story. The cafe's gentle murmur provided a buffer of privacy as she began speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily got sick just after her 6th birthday," Helen said, her eyes fixed on the swirling coffee. "It started with what seemed like a simple fever. We took her to the emergency room when it wouldn't break." Aaron listened intently, noting how Helen's shoulders tensed with each word. She described the cascade of medical errors that followed: missed symptoms, delayed tests, wrong medications. The first doctor dismissed it as a common virus. By the time they realized it was meningitis, it was too late. Tears welled in Helen's eyes as she recounted those final days. Elliot never left her bedside. He kept promising her everything would be okay, that Daddy would fix it. But we watched her slip away, hour by hour. The doctors had so many excuses, so many explanations for their mistakes. She paused, taking a shaky breath. After Emily died, Elliot changed. At first, he threw himself into legal action. He filed complaints, met with lawyers, gathered evidence. But the hospital's legal team buried us in paperwork. No one would take responsibility. Aaron watched as Helen's expression hardened. The anger consumed him. He spent nights researching the doctors involved, tracking their movements. He started talking about making them pay, about ensuring they felt the same pain we did. His office walls became covered with their photos, their schedules, their families. "I tried to help him through his grief," Helen continued, her voice cracking. "But he wasn't interested in healing. He wanted revenge. He said the entire medical system was corrupt and needed to be destroyed. When I found detailed plans on his computer, ways to hurt people, to take children, I knew I had to leave." Helen wiped away tears with trembling fingers. The night I left, he didn't even seem to notice. He was too focused on his screens, his plans. The man I married, the loving father who used to swing Emily in the backyard, was gone. She looked directly at Aaron for the first time since beginning her story. He wasn't always like this. He loved Emily more than anything. Her death broke something in him that couldn't be fixed. Aaron absorbed Helen's words, understanding flowing through him even as his resolve remained firm. The weight of Elliot's tragedy didn't excuse his crimes, but it painted a clearer picture of his descent into darkness. "Thank you for telling me," Aaron said gently, recognizing the courage it took for Helen to share her pain. She nodded, gathering her purse and standing to leave, the burden of her past visible in every movement. In the dim light of his office, Aaron spread out the case files across his desk, creating a mosaic of pain and loss. Each folder contained a child's story, their photos staring back at him with innocent eyes. As he reviewed the details, a pattern began to emerge, clear as daylight once he saw it. "Maya, take a look at this," Aaron called out, his voice tight with realization. Maya entered his office, coffee in hand, and leaned over the scattered files. "Dr. Sarah Thompson, pediatrician, her son was taken," Aaron began, pointing to one file. "Dr. James Chen, surgeon, his daughter disappeared from a playground. Dr. Rebecca Mills, emergency medicine, her twins were targeted." Maya's eyes widened as she followed Aaron's logic. "They're all doctors," she breathed. "Every single victim has at least one parent in the medical field," Aaron confirmed, running his hand through his hair. Elliot wasn't just taking children randomly. He was specifically targeting medical professionals. Maya pulled up a chair, settling in to analyze the pattern. "It makes sense," she said softly. "After what happened to Emily, he blamed the entire medical profession. This was his way of making them feel his pain." Aaron nodded, picking up Helen's photo of Elliot and Emily. In it, Elliot beamed with pride, holding his daughter close. The joy in his eyes bore no trace of the monster he would become. "He researched each family thoroughly," Aaron continued, gesturing to detailed surveillance notes found in Elliot's safe house. Work schedules, routines, vulnerabilities. He left nothing to chance. He wanted them to experience the same helplessness he felt when he couldn't save Emily. Maya studied the evidence, her expression grim. "Understanding his motivation helps us build a stronger case," she acknowledged. "But Aaron, don't let empathy for his loss cloud your judgment. What he did to these families, it's unforgivable." "I know," Aaron replied, his voice firm despite the emotion threatening to crack it. "I can understand his grief without excusing his actions. These children, their families, they deserved better than to be pawns in his revenge." He looked at Emily's photo once more, seeing not just Elliot's lost daughter, but all the children whose lives he had disrupted. The weight of their combined pain settled heavily on his shoulders. "We'll make sure he faces justice," Maya assured him, gathering the files into organized piles. "For all of them." Aaron sat at his desk, surrounded by evidence of Elliot's calculated cruelty. The photo of father and daughter remained in his hands, a reminder of how grief could twist love into something unrecognizable. He silently vowed to fight for both the victims of Elliot's revenge and the memory of the little girl whose death had set this tragedy in motion. In Aaron's office, medical files and hospital records covered every available surface. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across documents that told the tragic story of Emily Graves' final days. Aaron straightened his tie, preparing for what would be one of the most challenging meetings of his career. Dr. Marcus Hall, Dr. Evelyn Carter, and Dr. James Proctor filed into the conference room, their faces tense. Hospital board members and legal representatives followed, filling the remaining seats around the large oak table. "Thank you for coming," Aaron began, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "I've reviewed Emily Graves' medical records extensively." He pulled out a thick folder, spreading the documents methodically across the table. There were multiple instances where immediate intervention could have saved her life. Dr. Hall shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Officer Blake, you have to understand the complexity of hospital operations." I understand perfectly, Aaron interrupted, pointing to a specific chart. Emily's oxygen levels dropped critically 3 times before anyone responded. The attending nurse's notes clearly show she requested immediate physician attention. Dr. Carter's professional facade cracked slightly. We had multiple critical cases that night, including a board member's son, Aaron added, causing several people to flinch, who, according to these records, had a less urgent condition than Emily. The room fell silent as Aaron continued presenting evidence. Timestamps, nurse logs, and medical charts painted a clear picture of negligence. The doctor's excuses gradually gave way to uncomfortable silence. Dr. Proctor was the first to break. "We made mistakes," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "We prioritized cases we shouldn't have. Emily's condition seemed stable initially, but we missed the warning signs." "Missed them because you were focused elsewhere," Aaron pressed, "on patients with influential parents." The hospital board members exchanged worried glances as the doctor's confessions continued. Dr. Carter detailed how they'd overlooked critical symptoms, while Dr. Hall admitted to delegating Emily's care to less experienced staff. Aaron turned to the board members. These doctors' actions directly resulted in a child's death. What's more, they created a father's descent into darkness. I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for accountability. The board chairman cleared his throat. "What are you proposing, Officer Blake?" "Immediate suspension of all 3 doctors pending a full investigation," Aaron replied, "and a public statement acknowledging the hospital's failure in Emily's case." After hours of negotiation, the board agreed. The doctors would be suspended and the hospital would issue a formal apology. But Aaron wasn't finished. He outlined his plans for a broader campaign, one that would push for systematic changes in healthcare practices. "This isn't just about Emily anymore," he explained. "It's about preventing similar tragedies in the future." Later that day, Aaron stood at a podium before a crowd of reporters and concerned citizens. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as he spoke about the need for accountability in healthcare, his words carrying the weight of both justice and hope. The prison meeting room felt colder than its actual temperature, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the metal table where Elliot Graves sat in handcuffs. 2 guards stood at attention near the door as Aaron Blake entered, his footsteps echoing against the concrete walls. Aaron pulled out the chair across from Elliot and sat down, placing a thick folder between them. Elliot's face remained impassive, but his eyes flickered briefly to the documents. "The doctors who treated Emily have been suspended," Aaron began, his voice steady. "Dr. Hall, Dr. Carter, and Dr. Proctor have all admitted to their negligence. The hospital board is implementing new protocols to prevent similar incidents." Elliot's jaw tightened, but he remained silent as Aaron continued. "We're pushing for systematic changes in healthcare practices. Patient prioritization will no longer be influenced by social status or connections. Emily's case is being used as an example of what happens when the system fails." A single tear rolled down Elliot's cheek, catching him by surprise. He tried to wipe it away with his shoulder, his handcuffs rattling against the table. "They're being held accountable," Aaron said softly. "The truth about Emily's death is public now. People are listening. Changes are happening." More tears followed as Elliot's carefully constructed walls began to crumble. His shoulders shook with silent sobs, years of pent-up grief finally breaking through. "You," Elliot's voice cracked, "you did what I couldn't." "I did it legally," Aaron emphasized, "without hurting innocent children." Elliot's expression hardened slightly. "They deserve to suffer like I suffered, like Emily suffered." "Did they?" Aaron challenged. "Those children you took, they were innocent, just like Emily. You became the very thing you were fighting against. You caused the same pain you experienced." "It was justice," Elliot insisted, though his voice wavered. "The system failed Emily. Someone had to make them pay." "Emily wouldn't have wanted this," Aaron said firmly. "She wouldn't have wanted other children to be traumatized, other parents to experience the agony you went through." Elliot's hands trembled. "You don't know what she would have wanted." "I know she was loved by a father who once valued life, who once protected the innocent instead of harming them," Aaron replied. The man in those photos with Emily. He wouldn't recognize who you've become. Tears continued to stream down Elliot's face as he struggled with Aaron's words. His breathing became uneven, his composure completely shattered. "I can't take it back," he whispered. "I can't undo what I've done." "No," Aaron agreed. "But you can choose to honor Emily's memory differently from now on." Elliot shook his head, clinging to his justifications even as doubt crept into his eyes. The pain, it never stopped. Making them suffer was the only thing that helped. "Did it really help?" Aaron asked. "Or did it just create more pain, more victims, more suffering?" Elliot fell silent, his tears gradually subsiding as he sat in his chair, visibly conflicted. Aaron's words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth and challenge. As Aaron stood to leave, Elliot remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the table, the weight of his actions, and Aaron's words pressing down on him like a physical force. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Claire's modest suburban home, casting gentle shadows across the living room where Claire Anderson sat wringing her hands. Her eyes were tired, marked by dark circles that spoke of sleepless nights spent comforting her daughter. "She barely sleeps anymore," Claire confided to Aaron, her voice trembling. "When she does, the nightmares come. She wakes up screaming, calling for help." She paused, fighting back tears. "Sometimes she doesn't recognize me right away. It's like she's still there, still trapped." Aaron listened intently, his heart heavy. The bright, brave girl who had approached him in the diner seemed to have retreated deep within herself. "Has she talked to you about what she's feeling?" Claire shook her head. "She barely talks at all now. I'm losing her, Aaron. I'm afraid I'll never get my daughter back." Later that afternoon, Aaron sat with Lila in her room. She perched on the edge of her bed, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. The walls were painted a cheerful yellow, but the room felt heavy with unspoken fears. "You know," Aaron said gently, "it's okay to be scared. What you went through, no one should ever have to experience that." Lila's fingers twisted in her lap. "I can't stop seeing their faces," she whispered. "Every time I close my eyes, they're there. I keep thinking they'll come back." Aaron's heart ached at her words. After a moment of consideration, he shared his idea about Max, a trained therapy dog who worked with traumatized children. The following week, Aaron brought Max to meet Lila. The golden retriever's gentle brown eyes and wagging tail seemed to fill the room with warmth. Lila initially pressed herself against the wall, watching warily as Max settled onto the carpet. "He's specially trained," Aaron explained softly. "He helps kids who've been through scary things feel safe again." Max lay patiently, his head resting on his paws, until Lila took a hesitant step forward. When she finally reached out to touch his soft fur, her hand trembled. Max responded by gently nuzzling her palm. Over the next few weeks, Lila began to change. Her sessions with Max became the highlight of her days. She would sit with him for hours, sometimes talking quietly about her fears, other times simply stroking his fur. The nightmares began to come less frequently. Claire watched in amazement as her daughter slowly emerged from her shell. There were still difficult moments, still nights when the memories felt too heavy. But now Lila had a friend to help her through them. "He makes me feel brave," Lila told Aaron one afternoon, as Max rested his head in her lap. Her smile, though small, was genuine, the first real smile Aaron had seen since her rescue. Aaron observed the pair, noting how Lila's shoulders had relaxed, how she no longer jumped at sudden noises when Max was near. The therapy dog had become her anchor, helping her find her way back to herself one gentle interaction at a time. The prison meeting room felt different this time. The harsh fluorescent light still buzzed overhead, but Elliot Graves sat straighter, his expression more composed, though guarded. Aaron and Maya settled into their chairs across from him, the metal table between them a stark reminder of their circumstances. "There are still children out there," Aaron began, his voice steady. "Kids trapped in the same darkness Lila was in. You have the power to help them." Elliot's fingers twitched on the table. "Why should I help you?" "Because you know what it's like to lose a child," Maya interjected softly. These parents are going through that same hell right now. Something shifted in Elliot's eyes. He remained silent for a long moment, then let out a heavy sigh. The network. It's bigger than you realize. There are safe houses across 3 states, operated by people you'd never suspect. As Elliot spoke, Maya typed rapidly on her laptop, documenting every detail. He described sophisticated encryption methods, detailed protocols for moving children between locations, and the hierarchy of operators still at large. The main coordination happens through a series of encrypted channels, Elliot explained. I designed the system myself. Each operator has a unique access key, changed weekly. Maya's eyes widened as she cross-referenced his information with their existing data. This matches our surveillance patterns perfectly, she whispered to Aaron. Elliot continued, his voice growing quieter. I knew some of what they were doing wasn't right, but I was so consumed by my own pain. He trailed off, shaking his head. Within hours, tactical teams mobilized across multiple locations. The raids were precisely coordinated, striking simultaneously to prevent warnings between operatives. Safe houses were breached, computer systems seized, and high-ranking members of the network arrested in their homes and offices. The success was overwhelming. Dozens of children were rescued, some who had been missing for months. Each safe house yielded more evidence, more connections, more proof that Elliot's information was genuine. After the dust settled, Aaron returned to the prison. Elliot sat waiting, his expression unreadable. Your information saved lives, Aaron said simply. Elliot nodded once, and though his face remained impassive, his eyes held a glimmer of something new, a tiny spark of hope in the darkness he had created. The community center's soft lighting and muted colors did little to ease the tension as families filed in, their faces etched with a mix of anger, fear, and uncertainty. Security guards positioned themselves strategically around the room, their presence both reassuring and a stark reminder of why everyone had gathered. Elliot entered, his handcuffs clinking softly. The sound made several people flinch. Aaron stood near the back, watching carefully as Elliot took his seat at the front of the room. Thank you for coming, Elliot began, his voice barely above a whisper. I know I don't deserve your time or attention. He paused, struggling to maintain his composure. I lost my daughter Emily to medical negligence. The pain, it consumed me. I convinced myself that making other parents suffer would somehow balance the scales. His voice cracked. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. A woman in the second row stood up, her hands trembling. My son Tommy hasn't slept through the night since you took him, she said. He's 8 years old, and he's afraid of the dark now, afraid of strangers, afraid of being alone. Elliot's shoulders sagged as he listened. Another parent, a father with graying hair, spoke next. Our family nearly fell apart, he said, his voice tight with emotion. My wife blamed herself. Our other children were terrified they'd be next. Do you understand what you did to us? Tears streamed down Elliot's face as he nodded. I do now. Each night in my cell, I think about the children I hurt, the families I destroyed. I know sorry isn't enough, but I am sorry. So deeply sorry. A mother in the back row stood up. I lost my daughter 2 years ago, she said softly. I understand that kind of pain, but what you did... She shook her head. Those children were innocent. They didn't deserve to pay for your grief. The room fell silent as Elliot absorbed their words. His hands shook as he wiped his eyes. You're right, he said. They didn't deserve any of it. I became the very thing I hated, someone who hurt children. Several families shared their stories, each one hitting Elliot like a physical blow. He listened, shoulders hunched, as they described sleepless nights, therapy sessions, and shattered trust. By the end, Elliot looked utterly broken, the full weight of his actions finally settling on his shoulders. Aaron watched from his position near the wall as the families began to leave, some casting final glances at the man who had caused them so much pain. Elliot remained seated, tears flowing freely now, while Aaron observed this moment of genuine transformation. The conference hall buzzed with anticipation as Aaron Blake approached the podium. Hundreds of faces looked up at him: doctors, nurses, lawmakers, and families who had been touched by his work. The banner above his head caught the light. "Building a safer, healthier future." Aaron adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. "6 months ago, I learned about a little girl named Emily," he began. "She died because of medical oversights that could have been prevented. Her father's grief led him down a dark path, but her story showed me that we need to do better." The audience listened intently as Aaron outlined the systemic failures that had allowed Emily's tragedy to occur. He presented data showing similar patterns across hospitals nationwide, emphasizing how simple protocol changes could save lives. "Today, I'm announcing the creation of the Emily Graves Foundation," Aaron continued, his voice strong and clear. "This organization will fund medical education programs, support patient advocacy, and help hospitals implement stronger safety measures." Several hospital administrators in the audience nodded as Aaron described the new protocols being adopted. These included mandatory second opinions for critical cases, improved communication systems between departments, and regular audits of patient care standards. "But this isn't just about medical reform," Aaron said, shifting topics. "Through my work in law enforcement, I've seen how vulnerable our children are. The foundation will also focus on educating communities about child trafficking awareness." Parents of rescued children stood up from their seats, joining Aaron on stage. Each shared brief but powerful testimonies about their experiences and the importance of community vigilance. "My daughter was taken from a park I thought was safe," one mother said, her voice trembling but determined. "Now I work with local schools to teach parents about predator tactics and warning signs." The audience responded with supportive applause as more families shared their stories. Aaron watched from the podium, remembering each case and the children he'd helped save. "Together we can prevent other families from experiencing these tragedies," Aaron continued. "The foundation will provide resources for communities to establish neighborhood watch programs, conduct safety audits of public spaces, and create support networks for families affected by trafficking." Healthcare professionals in the audience began raising their hands, eager to volunteer their expertise. Policymakers took notes, already considering how to translate these ideas into legislation. Aaron concluded his speech by sharing his vision for the future, one where hospitals operated with greater accountability and communities worked together to protect their children. The audience rose to their feet, their applause filling the hall with thunderous support. The bell above the diner door chimed just as it had that fateful night years ago. Aaron Blake sat in the same booth, his coffee steaming in front of him. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow across the worn tabletop. The diner buzzed with the cheerful chatter of customers and the clinking of plates. A tall teenage girl with bright eyes entered, followed by her mother. Lila Mason had grown into a confident young woman, her shoulders straight and her smile genuine. Claire Anderson walked beside her daughter, pride evident in her expression. "Aaron!" Lila called out, rushing over to wrap him in a tight hug. The hesitant, frightened child from that dark night was gone, replaced by someone who radiated strength and purpose. They settled into the booth, and the waitress brought over a stack of pancakes, the same item that had sat untouched in front of a terrified 8-year-old Lila years ago. "You won't believe how amazing the support group is going," Lila said, cutting into her pancakes with enthusiasm. "Last week we had 3 new kids join. They were so scared at first, but by the end of the session they were actually smiling." Claire reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "Lila spends every Saturday afternoon volunteering at the trauma center. The younger kids really look up to her." "They just need someone who understands," Lila explained, her voice soft but steady. "When I tell them my story, they realize they're not alone. That's what you taught me, Aaron. You showed me that there are good people willing to fight for us." Aaron listened as Lila described her work with other survivors. She helped organize therapy sessions, spoke at schools about safety awareness, and mentored children struggling to overcome their trauma. Her eyes lit up as she talked about a recent success story, a young boy who had finally started speaking again after months of silence. "Remember how scared I was that first night?" Lila asked, gesturing around the diner, I didn't think I'd ever feel safe again. But you changed that. You showed me that one person can make a difference." Claire wiped away a tear, watching her daughter speak with such conviction. "We both found our purpose because of you, Aaron. I've been working with the Emily Graves Foundation, helping implement those new hospital protocols. It feels good to be part of the change." Aaron felt a warmth spread through his chest as he watched them. The pancakes on their plates were no longer symbols of fear but of healing and growth. Lila had transformed her pain into purpose, using her experience to light the way for others. "I'm so proud of you, Lila," Aaron said, his voice thick with emotion. "You've taken something terrible and turned it into hope for others. That takes incredible strength." Lila smiled, the same bright smile that had slowly emerged during her therapy sessions with Max, the dog who had helped her learn to trust again. "I learned from the best," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze Aaron's hand. The three of them sat in the bustling diner, sharing memories and laughter. The booth that had once witnessed a moment of terror now held a scene of triumph, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of compassion to change lives. In the peaceful courtyard of the Oakwood Mental Health Facility, sunlight filtered through the maple trees, casting dappled shadows on the grass. Elliot Graves sat in a comfortable chair, surrounded by a small group of children who listened intently as he read from The Little Prince. His voice was gentle and animated, bringing the story to life with each carefully chosen word. The mental health staff watched from a respectful distance, noting the remarkable transformation in their patient. After months of intensive therapy and treatment for his trauma, Elliot had slowly begun to heal. His decision to volunteer at the local children's organization marked a significant turning point in his recovery. Among the children sat Sammy, a quiet 7-year-old with curious brown eyes. Unlike the other children who visited weekly, Sammy was a resident at the nearby orphanage. He always chose to sit closest to Elliot, hanging on every word of the stories. "Can you read another chapter?" Sammy asked softly when Elliot finished the current section. Elliot smiled, the warmth reaching his eyes, something that hadn't happened in years. "Of course we can, Sammy. There's always time for one more chapter." As the weeks passed, Elliot found himself looking forward to these reading sessions more and more. The children's laughter and innocent questions helped heal parts of him he thought were permanently broken. But it was Sammy's presence that touched him most deeply. The boy's resilience despite his circumstances reminded Elliot of the strength children possessed. During one session, Sammy stayed behind after the other children left. He showed Elliot a drawing he'd made, 2 stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. "That's you and me," he explained shyly. Elliot felt something shift in his heart as he looked at the simple drawing. The love he thought had died with Emily began to stir again, different, but just as profound. After careful consideration and extensive discussions with his therapists and the adoption agency, Elliot began the process of adopting Sammy. The journey wasn't easy. Given his past, there were numerous evaluations and requirements to meet. But Elliot persevered, demonstrating his commitment to rehabilitation and his genuine desire to provide a loving home for Sammy. Finally, after months of preparation, paperwork, and proving himself, Elliot welcomed Sammy into his home. They created new routines together, making breakfast, reading stories before bedtime, and taking walks in the park. Each shared moment helped both of them heal from their past wounds. Sammy brought laughter back into Elliot's life, while Elliot provided the stability and love Sammy had always longed for. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, built on understanding, patience, and unconditional love. "You're not alone anymore," Elliot would tell Sammy during their nightly reading sessions, words that healed them both. One bright afternoon, they walked hand in hand through the park near their home. Sammy's laughter rang out as he told Elliot about his day at school. Elliot listened intently, savoring every moment of their shared joy. The weight of his past felt lighter with each step they took together. If you enjoyed the story of Elliot, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.